thing. So we've all seen it, right? Justin Trudeau, from political rock star to, well, facing a whole lot of disillusionment, and especially among young Canadians. We're gonna really dig into why that honeymoon phase fizzled out, what it all means, for the hopes and anxieties of a whole generation. We've got news articles. We even dove into some pretty heated online discussions to guide us on this journey.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating case study when you think about it. Like back in the 2015 election, Trudeau, he seemed to tap into something, really powerful, this yearning for change that just resonated so deeply with young voters.
Yeah, the CBC article, it paints a pretty vivid picture of that whole Trudeau mania thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was young, he was charismatic, super active online, not like those previous leaders, that's for sure. And his focus on issues like climate change, reconciliation, feminism, I mean, that really set him apart.
Yeah, but it wasn't just like the image he was projecting. He also made some pretty concrete promises, right?
Yeah.
Things like electoral reform. And that tapped into a real desire for political change among young voters. It really felt like a new era was beginning.
And who could forget the cool factor, admitting to smoking weed? I mean, can you imagine any of his predecessors doing that? He was relatable, kind of rebellious even, in a way that I think really resonated with, a younger generation.
Oh, totally. And that relatability, it was strategic. It helped him connect with young people on like a cultural level.
Yeah.
It went beyond just like policy points.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But we all know the shine, it kind of wore off, didn't it? And the CBC article points to this turning point around 2016. That's when the protests against Trudeau started popping up and youth unemployment, it started to rise.
Oh, yeah. And remember that statistic from the CBC article? Canada's youth unemployment rate back in April 2024, it was the highest it's been since July 2016. Well, excluding the pandemic lockdowns, of course. But still, it's a pretty stark indicator, right? That things weren't exactly moving in the right direction for young Canadians.
Yeah, it's almost like this clash, the economic realities clashing with all those promises of hope and change. Like imagine, right, entering adulthood and facing this job market where you're constantly struggling to make ends meet, even with a good education. That disconnect, it can breed some serious frustration, even resentment.
Absolutely. The cost of living, housing prices, lack of good job opportunities, it all created this sense of hopelessness.
Yeah.
And that contrasts so sharply with all that optimism from back in 2015.
For sure. And then, well, the pandemic hit. It's like throwing gasoline on an already smoldering fire, right?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine you're in your early 20s, the pandemic hits, you're just entering the workforce, and bam, everything shuts down. The jobs you were counting on, gone. The social connections, poof, they vanish. Even the education you were investing in, disrupted. It's no wonder this generation is, demanding more from their leaders.
Right. The pandemic, it really exposed how vulnerable those systems are. The systems that are supposed to support young people. It's like the cracks were always there, but the pandemic, it just blew them wide open.
Yeah, what might have worked back in 2015, those broad strokes of hope and change, it just wasn't enough anymore. Not enough to meet the very specific needs of young people trying to get through a global crisis. It was a harsh reality check for a lot of people.
Definitely. And when we look at those Reddit threads you sent over, man, you can see those frustrations boiling over. I mean, some people are still positive about Trudeau's time in office, but there's a lot of anger there, a lot of disillusionment.
Oh yeah, those threads, they offer a raw, unfiltered glimpse into how young Canadians are processing Trudeau's legacy. They highlight that gap, the gap between the promises that were made and the actual lived realities of so many young people,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like affordable housing and job security.
Yeah, it's like they were sold this dream that just never materialized. One commenter even said, "We chose platitudes over policy and we got what we deserved." Harsh, but it really speaks to that sense of betrayal some people are feeling.
Yeah, there's this feeling that the political system, regardless of who's in charge, that is failing to deliver on the basic needs of young people. They feel unheard, unseen, and let down. And some of that disappointment, whether fairly or not, it's directed at Trudeau.
Right, and that feeling of disillusionment, it really comes through in those comments. It's like they're questioning the entire political process, can any politician truly represent their interests?
It's a valid question. And it's interesting to think about why young Canadians continue to support Trudeau through 3 elections. Despite all these growing concerns, was it a lack of alternatives? Maybe a lingering hope that things would change? Or maybe just a sense of resignation? It's a puzzle worth exploring, that's for sure. So we've talked about this disillusionment, right? But What are some specific things, like policy areas, where young Canadians are looking for change?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if we look at the Reddit thread and the CBC article, there are a few key themes that kind of jump out, don't they? Affordable housing. I mean, that seems to be a huge one. I mean, how do you build a future when you can't even afford a decent place to live, right? It's like the foundation is crumbling before they can even start building.
Yeah, it's such a fundamental need, and it's become increasingly out of reach for so many. And it's not just about finding any housing, it's about affordable housing, housing that lets them save for the future, maybe start a family, or even just pursue their passions without being totally crushed by rent or mortgage payments.
Exactly. And what's interesting is both sources suggest that the current approaches to affordable housing, they're just not cutting it. Simply building more units without thinking about affordability or even exploring new solutions like co-housing or rent-to-own programs, I mean, that's not going to solve the problem.
No, not at all. We need to rethink our whole approach to housing.
Right.
The system right now, it seems to benefit landlords and developers more than the people who actually need a place to live.
Totally. It's creating a generation burdened by housing insecurity, constantly worried about making rent or getting priced out of their neighborhoods. And that stress, I mean, it spills over into everything else. Their mental well-being, their relationships, everything.
Oh, absolutely. Which, brings us to another major theme from these sources, access to mental health services.
Oh, yeah, for sure. One commenter in the Reddit thread, they talked about the mental health crisis, how hard it is to find affordable and timely care. They even said, it's like you're drowning and no one throws you a life preserver.
Man, that's heartbreaking. It's like they're being told to just be happy or toughen up, when they're dealing with real and often debilitating mental health challenges.
And the irony is, right, the very conditions that are creating this mental health crisis, things like precarious employment, unaffordable housing, climate anxiety, those are often dismissed or downplayed by the people in power.
Yeah, it creates this vicious cycle where the systems that are supposed to help, they're failing the people who need them most. We need to prioritize mental health care, make sure it's accessible to everyone who needs it, regardless of their income or background.
Right, absolutely. And then there's the job market, of course. The CBC article, they had this pretty grim statistic about youth unemployment being at its highest point since 2016. Well, again, excluding the pandemic period.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture, that's for sure. Young Canadians graduating with tons of debt, only to enter a job market that's, saturated, limited opportunities for advancement, wages that haven't kept up with the cost of living. It's tough out there.
It's no wonder they're feeling disillusioned. It's like they're playing by the rules, getting an education, working hard. But the system, it's not delivering on that promise of a good life.
No, it's not. There's a sense of betrayal there. Like they were misled about what it actually takes to succeed in this economy.
Okay, so we have these three major areas, right? Affordable housing, mental health services, and a job market that actually supports young people. So what would real action in these areas look like? What kind of policies could actually make a difference?
Well, with housing, I think we need to see a major, significant investment in affordable housing units. This could mean government-funded construction, tax incentives for developers who prioritize affordability, even rent control measures to prevent those crazy price hikes. And it can't just be any housing. It has to meet the actual needs of young people, not just cookie-cutter apartments in, undesirable locations.
Yeah, totally. It needs to be housing that allows them to build a life, not just survive.
Yeah.
And maybe even exploring those innovative solutions we talked about, like co-housing models or rent-to-own programs.
Exactly. We need to think outside the box. Stop relying on those same old solutions that haven't worked, and start exploring new approaches that prioritize people over profit.
I like that. And for mental health, I mean, we have to increase funding for services, train more mental health professionals, and I think really work to destigmatize mental health issues so people feel comfortable seeking help.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to shift our thinking from a crisis intervention model to a more preventative and holistic approach, one that integrates mental well-being into all aspects of our lives.
For sure. And we have to make sure those services are culturally sensitive too, right? That they meet the diverse needs of Canada's population.
Oh, absolutely. One size fits all just
Yeah.
doesn't work when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
We need to make sure everyone has access to culturally appropriate care that addresses their specific needs and experiences.
Okay, and then there's the job market. We need to invest in skills training, job creation programs that actually align with the demands of the future economy. Things like supporting apprenticeships, providing grants for entrepreneurship, creating incentives for businesses to hire young people.
And we can't forget about the cost of education, right? that crushing burden of student debt, reforming the student loan system, increasing access to grants and scholarships, making post-secondary education more affordable. All of that would go a long way in easing that burden.
It's about equipping young people with the skills they need to thrive in a rapidly changing economy, not just saddling them with debt and then saying, good luck.
Exactly, and it requires collaboration,
Hmm.
between the government, businesses, educational institutions. We all need to work together to create a more equitable and supportive system that actually sets young people up for success.
So it's not just about throwing money at the problem. It's about a fundamental shift in how we value and support young people, recognizing their potential and investing in their future.
Precisely. It's about creating a society where every young person, regardless of their background or circumstances, has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Okay, that sounds great in theory, but is it actually possible? Can we really achieve those kinds of systemic changes?
It's not going to be easy, that's for sure. But I do believe it's possible. It requires political will, a commitment to social justice, a willingness to challenge the status quo. We need to move beyond just talking about individual responsibility
Hmm.
and acknowledge that systemic factors play a huge role in shaping opportunities and outcomes.
And maybe, just maybe, we need a little bit of that Trudeau mania energy, that optimism, but channeled towards concrete action and sustainable solutions.
I like that. We need to recapture that sense of hope and possibility, but ground it in a realistic understanding of the challenges ahead.
So we've talked about the problems, we've talked about potential solutions, the importance of a systemic approach. But what about young people themselves? What can they do to be a part of shaping this better future?
That's a great question. Young people, they have a tremendous amount of power. They are the future of this country, and their voices matter. But they need to be organized, strategic, and persistent in their demands for change.
Okay, so let's talk about how they can use that power effectively.
Well, first and foremost, they need to stay engaged in the political process. This means voting in elections, contacting their elected officials, advocating for the issues they care about.
Yeah, it's not just about complaining on Reddit, it's about taking those concerns and turning them into action.
Exactly. Joining advocacy groups, volunteering in their communities, even just starting conversations with their friends and family about these issues. These are all ways to make a difference.
So it's about individual action, A&D, collective action. It's about recognizing that they have the power to create change and then actually taking steps to use that power.
Absolutely. And understanding that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to work together to build that better future.
One comment from the Reddit thread, it really stuck with me. This user said, I don't want to have to worry about whether I'll ever be able to afford a house or even just be able to access mental health services.
Hmm.
It's a simple statement, but it really speaks volumes about the anxieties that so many young Canadians are facing.
Yeah, it does. It highlights the fact that these aren't just like abstract policy issues. They're real-life challenges that impact people's daily lives. Their hopes, their dreams for the future, they're often tied to these very basic needs being met.
As we've been digging into all these challenges, I keep coming back to this idea of intergenerational dialogue. It seems like there's often this disconnect between how older generations view these issues and the actual lived experiences of young people today.
Oh yeah, that's a crucial point. There can be this lack of understanding, even a dismissal of young people's concerns, like they're just whining or they're entitled or whatever.
Mm.
And that attitude, man, it can be incredibly frustrating when you're genuinely struggling,
Mm.
when you feel like your voice isn't being heard.
Yeah, exactly. And it creates this barrier to finding solutions, right? If we can't even acknowledge the problem, how are we supposed to work together to fix it?
Well, it's important to remember that every generation faces its own unique set of challenges, right? The economic realities, the social norms, even the tech landscape. It's constantly evolving, so what worked for one generation might not work for another.
So how do we bridge that gap then? How do we have a more productive, more empathetic conversation between generations?
Well, it starts with listening, I think. Really listening to the experiences and perspectives of young people without judgment or preconceived notions.
And being willing to acknowledge that things have changed, right? The solutions of the past might not be effective in addressing the challenges of today.
Absolutely. And it also requires a willingness to learn from each other. Older generations, they can offer valuable insights and wisdom based on their own experiences, but younger generations, they bring fresh perspectives, innovative ideas to the table.
I like that. It's about recognizing that we all have something to contribute, no matter our age. We need to ditch that whole us versus them mentality and realize that we're all in this together.
Exactly. We need to create spaces for intergenerational dialogue, in our families, communities, even at the policy level.
Yeah, creating those spaces is so important. It's about fostering a sense of shared responsibility for building a better future.
Hmm.
We're not just talking about some abstract policy debates, right? We're talking about people's lives, their dreams, their anxieties. If we want to create a society that actually works for everyone, we need to make sure those voices are heard and those needs, they need to be addressed.
It's about recognizing that the well-being of one generation, it's intertwined with the well-being of all ill generations.
Mhm.
We're all connected, and we have a shared stake in creating a just and equitable society.
Okay, so we've done this deep dive into young Canadians' reflections on Justin Trudeau's legacy. What's the key takeaway you want listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important message is that young people, they're not passive bystanders. They are active agents of change, and their voices, they deserve to be heard, they deserve to be respected, and they deserve to be acted upon. They have a crucial role to play in shaping the future of Canada, and we need to create spaces for them to lead, to innovate, to contribute their unique perspectives.
It's been really fascinating, exploring all these complex issues, hearing those diverse voices from the sources you provided. I hope this deep dive, it's left you feeling informed, inspired, and ready to engage in these really crucial conversations.
Yeah, remember, change starts with each of us. It starts with listening, understanding, and taking action. It starts with recognizing that our challenges, they're all interconnected and working together to build a better future for everyone.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hopes and anxieties of a generation. We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully we've given you some food for thought, some inspiration to create some positive change. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of collective action.